but we are going to move on now to Raphael Gastrock, who is going to be giving his talk titled, I lost my notes, so I'm going to look up, there it is, the different mechanisms that distinguish motor skill acquisition from adaptation. So Raphael, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Adam. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and my pointer here. So yeah, hi everyone, I'm Raphael, and today I'll be talking about the behavioral mechanisms that distinguish acquiring motor skills from adaptation. And there are at least two types of motor learning often identified, and the first has been investigated extensively, and Shauna has talked about it in his talk earlier, which is motor adaptation, which suggests that a representational remapping has occurred somewhere in the brain. So a typical task would be to have participants reach towards a target. So in our experiment, it's in a radial array. They would use a digitizing tablet to reach, to get a cursor towards a target. But then we also introduce a rotation, and in our experiments, it's usually in the magnitude of 30 degrees. So you can see that the set or the magnitude of the rotation is fixed no matter where the target is. But another type of motor learning is de novo learning, where a new mapping is expected, such as when you're trying to learn a new skill. So previous research have identified that the mirror reversal task is able to investigate this type of learning. So here we match the target locations for those in the rotation task, but given the mirror axis in the middle here, you can see that depending on where the target location is, they would have to deviate their reaches in different magnitudes. So here it's 15, 30, and 45 degrees. So our experiment was a within subjects design. So we counterbalanced for the order that each participant experienced the perturbation, as well as where the axis was located of where they experienced each perturbation. So some would experience the rotation in a vertical position, others in a horizontal, and same for the mirror reversal. And this, we also counterbalanced for the target locations in relation to that axis. So essentially, no effects were observed. So learning one perturbation does not affect the other. And then we tried to quantify the learning for each perturbation across participants. So to make them comparable, given the different angles that they would have to deviate their reaches, we measured amount of compensation. So this is the percentage of how much they were deviating their hand relative to perfect compensation. So you can see that by comparing the two tasks here, both tasks or participants were able to learn both tasks relatively quickly within 90 trials, but it was definitely more variable for the mirror reversal compared to the visuomotor rotation. And as a measure of reach after effects, we simply plot the washout trials. So this is when the perturbation has been removed and they switch back to an aligned visual feedback. And we see evidence of reach after effects for the rotation, but not the mirror reversal. And as some other behavioral measures, we do look into reaction and movement times as well. So here I plot the aligned version as a kind of baseline or reference. And when we plot the reaction and movement times, we see that both times were slower for the mirror reversal compared to the rotation task. Now, in a second experiment, we wanted to explore the mirror reversal further using an online platform. So we had to simplify the task by using only two targets here in the 30 and 60 degree mark in polar coordinates. And basically, we had it only in the upper right quadrant of the workspace. And you could see like how much the participants had to deviate their hands in relation to the target position. So here I only plot the angular reach deviation because we're only comparing the two target locations. So perfect compensation for the 30-degree target would be at 120 degrees. And for the 60-degree target, it's at 60 degrees here. And the aligned session basically proceeds as expected. But once we introduce the mirror reversal, you can see that the 30-degree target, participants don't reach perfect compensation, unlike in the 60-degree target where they do reach near perfect compensation here. And also, we do not observe any evidence of reach after effects during the washout trials. But if you would notice, immediately during trial 1, reach deviations here are quite high already. So we wanted to look into this further to kind of try to explain what's happening here. So we did a plot of the participant distributions of the reach deviations for each trial. So here I show trial 1, and it's a circle because it goes from 0 to 360 degrees in terms of reach deviations. The target is aligned to 0 degrees, and perfect compensation would fall on 120 and 60 degrees respectively for each target. But basically, you find that in trial 1, there's a bimodal distribution of responses here, which would explain the high deviations in trial 1. But as trials progress, and I'll show trial 2 here, as well as trial 90, you can see that 90 would be the last trial, by the way. Most participants eventually respond towards the correct location, and that's actually clearer for the 30-degree target more so than the 60-degree target, because you still get responses near the 0-degree mark here. But this still doesn't answer why participants already know in which direction they should be reaching to begin with, even if trial 1 hasn't started. So we think that this may have something to do with our experiment. So since participants had to move the cursor to the start position at the beginning of the task, they could have explored the workspace at this time, even if trial 1 hasn't started. So as a separate analysis, I don't show it here, but what we did was we tried to compare the angular reach deviations with the movement time, or the time it took them to get to the start position, but found no relationship there for either target. So this is still an open question. It's something that we need to investigate further as to why they're already reaching in the correct direction here. But at least for this experiment, we were able to show that they are able to learn how to compensate for the mirror reversal in an online task. And just to summarize, the mechanisms underlying motor adaptation and de novo learning are distinct from each other, and future work will need to investigate the mirror reversal task further using an online platform. And with that, I'll open it up to the discussion and questions.
Great, thank you, Raphael. So there's, again, plenty of time for discussion, so you can go ahead and post any new questions for Raphael in the Q&A tab. It's really interesting that they are getting it on the first, getting the task on the first reach. Is your analysis checking at, you might have said this and I missed it, but is it the initial direction that they're going, or is it the endpoint that you're looking at here?
So we take a kind of like a proxy for the initial direction error. And to do that, we take basically 20% of the home to target distance. So if, for example, this is the home position, if you can see my hand and the target here. So like 20% of that distance when they're moving out, that's the point that we get essentially.
And how much could they possibly, is it possible to know how much curve or like how much they may be correcting in that, or is that not something that you've been able to look at? And
we actually,
because 20% is actually that's actually a reasonable amount of distance to begin the correction, especially if they've noticed that they're going wildly off course.
Yes, definitely. And we actually did try to plot the reach trajectories as well, just to kind of see like where they're going throughout the whole trial, right? And we do see that a lot of participants are not making relatively straight reaches. Most of them are making like a zigzag pattern, probably because they're trying to get used to the mirror reversal, right? So depending on which sample I get from that reach, these results would differ in terms of the how the magnitude that they would show in the angular reach deviations. But relatively speaking, like the plot that I show here, like it doesn't really change in terms of like the curve that it shows.
Okay, interesting. So yeah, really interesting. So you've got a few questions popping up in the Q&A. Nick, I saw before that you're comfortable being unmuted, so I'm gonna go ahead and give you permission to talk, and you can unmute yourself.
Can we hear me? Is that good?
Yep, can hear you.
Cool. Okay, thanks for the talk, Raphael. That was really interesting. I just wondered if you wanted to comment on maybe whether there's faster adaptation in the mirror reversal task, perhaps because we're more familiar with that kind of visual transformation in day-to-day life than perhaps a rotation around a start position. And I just wondered whether perhaps that was a reason you'd see a faster initial adaptation, or whether you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I wouldn't know whether it's correct to say that we're more used to dealing with a mirror reversal type of thing in everyday tasks. But I think what's happening here is that once you do understand how a mirror reversal is working, then that's it. It's kind of like it happens in like a snap. You know how to deal with it immediately. But in the rotation, you kind of take more trials to become more exact with where exactly you're moving. So here I'm guessing that in trial 1, they immediately find out like, oh, this is how the workspace is working. If I move here, the cursor goes there. And they could easily just apply this to the other target since it's in the same quadrant, and they wouldn't have to deal with the target being at some other place relative to the mirror axis here.
But in theory, that could work for the rotation as well, right? You could just pretty quickly work out that that's the rotation, and then you just apply that to the other targets as well, unless I'm like missing something.
Yes, definitely.
Or do you just think that, and that's why I kind of thought that maybe, I don't know, more intuitively we understand a mirror reversal perhaps than like a rotation, but I don't know, maybe it's, you know, one of those things.
But also like just to add to that, probably it has also something to do with the explicit and implicit learning that you have for the rotation and the mirror reversal, where like what you said in the rotation, technically you can just figure out the strategy and immediately like show an advantage in dealing with it. And probably with the mirror reversal, it's more of an explicit strategy or your explicit component or contribution to the learning that you're showing here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So we also have a question from Alexander Cates. I don't know if Alexander wants to come on, but we're short on time, so I'm going to ask it for him. In graph and experiment 2, which you actually have displayed right now, would perfect performance for 60 and 100 degree would perfect performance be 60 and 120 degrees to compensate? Why do you think, and if that's the case, why do you think that the participants are actually performing worse as they proceed in the task?
That's a good question, and I don't have the exact answer for it, but if I were to guess what's happening here, it may be that the mirror reversal task becomes harder as you move further away from the mirror axis. So the 30-degree target here would be kind of close to the horizontal line, basically. So it could be that participants just try to reach in a general correct direction and then just adjust for it afterwards, which we don't really capture in the measures that I'm showing here. But it could be like, as long as they're in the correct quadrant, then they could just adjust their movement to do the task or get the cursor to the target afterwards.
Great. Yeah, that's